Two astronauts are given the privilege of returning to and from Earth during their space mission. However, their journey is marred by unforeseen and tragic consequences. The Ross family plans to go to the movies to celebrate their son's birthday. While waiting for his wife to get ready, David sketches a portrait of his children, Lily and Ricky. Soon, Jessica, his wife, walks into the room and tells everyone that it's time to go. Elsewhere, Cliff Stanfield chucks some wood in his barn while his son, Henry, watches him. He then brings the firewood to the living room, where his wife, Lana, relaxes with a book. He subtly asks her to prepare dinner, so Lana gets up immediately to cook. In the cinema, David catches the attention of a couple who recognize him as an astronaut volunteering for a groundbreaking mission. Intrigued, the couple requests to touch his hand, curious to confirm his physical presence. David obliges their request, but before he can explain the intricacies of the mission, Jessica hints that they should go. Meanwhile, Cliff, who happens to be David's co-pilot, joins his family at the dinner table but doesn't eat with them. Unlike his colleague, Cliff seems stern and distant, so he avoids fame by moving his family to the countryside. When the Ross family reaches their home, Jessica notices a peculiar van parked outside. However, she pays no heed and goes on her way. That night, David tucks the children to bed while Jessica prepares cocktails downstairs. He then joins her, and together, they sway to the music playing in the background. The intimate atmosphere gradually intensifies, and they almost copulate until the alarm blares from David's watch. Disappointed yet resigned to his obligations, he bids his wife goodbye. Likewise, Cliff excuses himself from Lana. Simultaneously, David and Cliff lie on a device that transmits their consciousness back to a spacecraft, where their real bodies are. Using this device, the astronauts transport their consciousness to their replicas on Earth, allowing their minds to go back and forth between Earth and outer space. Upon arrival, David informs Cliff of a crack in the solar coating. With this, he helps him gear up to fix the damages outside the spacecraft. After completing this, Cliff returns inside, where David asks questions about his recent move to the countryside. He wonders how his family is reacting to it, especially Lana, who he thinks is a social butterfly. However, Cliff is reserved with his replies, merely saying that they're all adjusting just fine. Shortly after, the two insert their links into a machine, allowing them to return to Earth. As soon as he arrives, Cliff goes directly to their room, where he catches Lana still reading. As he gets dressed for bed, she suggests having a little party for the locals to get acquainted with them. However, Cliff disapproves, leading Lana to drop the idea. He then drifts off to sleep, seemingly unapologetic for his actions. Meanwhile, David awakens from a clattering noise downstairs. He cautiously takes a bat with him and investigates. To his surprise, a group of extremist hipsters have invaded his home as they've been observing their family from the van, waiting for a chance to strike. The leader, Kappa, introduces his friends Sigma, Theta, and Epsilon, and they're all curious about the inner workings of David's earthbound body. David threatens them to leave, but they only team up to overpower him. He gets pinned to the table, where Kappa slices off his arm, revealing the mechanical parts within. Dissatisfied, he tells his gang to bring the poor man's family downstairs before knocking the replica out. This transports David's consciousness back to his body in space. Upon waking in the spacecraft, David quickly returns to Earth, where he finds himself tied on the sofa. His family is now held hostage by the hippies, who insist that their way of life is unnatural. Kappa further stresses that defying nature comes with a cost, and David must pay for it. With the astronaut helplessly constrained, Kappa orders the others to kill the family. David can only scream and squirm as his loved ones are butchered in front of him, followed by the horrific act of burning them and his replica. The following day, Cliff wakes up to the startling news about the Ross family, urging him to return to space to console David. He finds him in the greenhouse, but he's still full of rage and refuses to receive sympathy. Cliff returns to Earth, where the news has already been published in the morning papers. He then informs Lana that the hippies, whom he thinks is a cult, surrendered themselves to the authorities. He's also worried about their own safety, but he's assured that they're too far from the city for this to happen. It pains him to see David suffer, as it'll take 4 more years until their mission ends. On top of this, David is stuck in space because it's impossible to create another replica of him without being on Earth. Over the following days, Cliff continues his usual routine of transporting his consciousness from space to Earth. However, he can't help but notice that David is getting depressed by the day. Eventually, the Ross family receives a funeral, but David can only witness this through a live broadcast. As Cliff enjoys the benefits of returning to Earth, David is stuck in the aircraft, doing mundane tasks to pass the time. One day, Cliff is forced to return to space when he gets alerted of an airlock issue that David caused. When he returns to Earth, he voices his concerns to Lana, saying that David's condition might jeopardize them both. The aircraft is a 2-man ship that relies on the 2 astronauts working together. If David kills himself, it will leave Cliff with the same fate. Worried, the couple formulates ideas on how to help David. Lana suggests lending her husband's link to allow David to return to Earth using his body momentarily. Cliff is skeptical about the idea, but chooses chooses to show his friend kindness. With this, he goes to the spacecraft and introduces the offer to David, which immediately brings life to his eyes. He then lies on Cliff's device, waiting as his friend inserts his link. Soon after, David finds himself in Cliff's body and is pleased by the sight of the peaceful countryside. Lana welcomes him and invites him to stroll the forest together. He seizes the opportunity without hesitation, and soon after, they stop by Lana's favorite spot under a large tree. In this tranquil setting, David's attention is drawn to a small caterpillar, but as he stares at it, a surge of grief takes over him, causing him to burst into tears. Lana immediately hugs him, offering him much-needed comfort. Later, they return to the house so that David can return to space. However, before going, he compliments Lana's home. Upon returning to the spacecraft, he immediately thanks Cliff for his kindness. His colleague acknowledges David's gratitude, but he doesn't stay for long and makes his way back to Earth. While he's away, inspiration electrifies David, leading him to grab his sketchbook and create art. Meanwhile, Cliff asks Lana what David did while he was with her. She merely says that he wept like a child, but doesn't share that she embraced him. Days later, Cliff returns to the spacecraft, where David eagerly presents him with a remarkable drawing of his house. Astounded by David's ability to recreate the image from memory, Cliff admires the artwork, stating that he would love to hang it in his home if he could. With this, David proposes that he create an actual painting in their home, but he will have to use his replica. However, he suddenly feels embarrassed, saying that it would be unfair of him to use Cliff's link again. Cliff reassures him that he'll think about it, bringing hope to the once depressed David. Soon, Cliff speaks to Lana about the matter, informing her that David will use his link for an hour every week while he's in the spacecraft for his physical examination. This will provide him time to paint in the barn. Despite her hesitation, Lana agrees. When it's time for Cliff's physical, he assists David to his house. There, Lana welcomes David to the barn, where he gets a full view of the house, complete with the painting materials he needs. Before Lana leaves, David asks her about the book she's reading, which gladdens her because nobody really asks for her thoughts. She merely replies that it's trashy, so David promises to provide her with book recommendations. The rest of the month goes on as a routine of David using Cliff's replica once a week. One day, he encourages Lana to add something to the painting, but stands behind her while guiding her hand with a brush. This moment is interrupted when Henry suddenly calls for her. As the days pass, David starts developing feelings for Lana, and he secretly sketches portraits of her while Cliff is away. One day, as he continues the painting, he runs out of linseed oil, so he asks Lana if they can drive to town to get some. She meekly agrees, but as they do, David suggests stopping by the bookstore. There, he chooses a book for her like he promised. When they pay for it, the cashier recognizes him as Cliff, which David confirms. However, his mood changes when the cashier expresses her sympathies for what happened to the Ross family. Upon returning to the car, David lets out an exasperated sigh. Sensing his need for solace, Lana reaches out and places her hand gently on his shoulder. In response, he puts his hand over hers. Meanwhile, Cliff notices that it's taking longer for David to return every time he uses his replica, which raises his concern. Days later, Lana notices that David added her to the painting, greatly flattering her. Suddenly, he asks her to dance with him to the music on the radio. However, as they get lost in the moment, things begin to escalate between them, blurring each of their boundaries. Just then, Lana snaps into reality and pulls away. She immediately walks out of the barn, but David follows her, unaware that Henry is watching them. In the house, David continues his pursuit of Lana by sensually touching her neck. However, she remains persistent in rejecting him, saying that he's not her husband and he can't just wear him like he's a suit. David argues that he can see how she looks at him, but Lana bluntly replies that he doesn't even have a physical form. This brings David back to the harsh reality of his life, leading him to retreat to the barn. However, he fumes in anger as he discovers that Henry has smudged the painting. Soon, Lana notices Henry running into the house. After checking on her son, she goes to the barn and tells David to leave. Upon returning to the spacecraft, David's avoidance concerns Cliff, prompting him to investigate what transpired during his visit. He speaks to Lana on Earth and learns that Henry destroyed David's painting. However, Lana asserts that the man reacted by striking their son. While she defends Henry, Cliff reframes the situation and believes that the boy needs to be disciplined. Lana becomes frustrated with David's involvement in their family, but Cliff reassures her that he'll only give the man 2 more visits, which is enough to finish his painting. Afraid of saying more about what happened, Lana compromises with the situation. Soon after, David returns to Earth using Cliff's replica. However, despite his efforts to make amends with Lana, she only avoids him. With this, he resorts to finishing the painting in the barn. Meanwhile, Cliff's treadmill breaks down, causing him to pass the time by exploring David's room. There, he finds portraits of the man's family, but to his shock, he discovers a collection of bare sketches of Lana. Furious, he sends an alert to David, urging him to return to the spacecraft. Upon arriving, Cliff immediately addresses the pressing issue. David owns up to what he did, but he reasons that he got carried away because Lana was too beautiful. Angry, Cliff punches David, causing him to bleed. Suddenly, David speaks up, saying that everything he wants once had is now gone. However, Cliff, who has everything a man could need, is unappreciative of his blessings. He adds that Lana is a lonely woman who's unsatisfied and untouched. Hearing this offends Cliff, so he pushes David against the wall and asserts that he's well aware of what he has. Later, Cliff returns to Earth and smashes David's painting. Lana runs to him and asks what's happening, but he only ambushes her with questions, asking if she posed for his co-pilot or touched him. He goes on to reveal that David drew her bare. However, Lana calmly denies the allegations and even swears it on her life and Henry's. She does come clean about David's advances, which only infuriates Cliff because she still allowed him to visit. However, Lana reminds him of how David hit Henry, but Cliff didn't listen back then. This causes Cliff to concede, but he brings up the topic of her being lonely. Lana bluntly reveals that their marriage is lifeless, and in David's brief presence in Cliff's body, she experienced a fleeting sensation of reconnecting with her husband. This revelation strikes Cliff, making him confront his own ungratefulness. In response, he embraces Lana tightly, sincerely apologizing for his past actions. Days later, Cliff returns to the spacecraft, where David apologizes for everything he's done. However, the man still has the audacity to ask for another visit to Earth, claiming that he'll use the opportunity to apologize to Lana. As expected, Cliff rejects the idea and adds that Lana is disgusted by his mere existence, asserting that she's all his. Days pass and Cliff goes on his regular routine, but he's now having a much better relationship with his family. One day, he receives an alert from David urging him to head to the spacecraft. There, David tells him that the coolant tubing got hit by debris, so he needs to go outside and fix it. Right away, Cliff removes his clothes to gear up, including his link. However, as soon as he gets to the coolant, he realizes that there's no damage at all. He hurriedly climbs back to the entrance, repeatedly banging on the glass for David to hear. After a while, David finally opens the hatch, and as soon as Cliff sees him, he asks where he's been. David replies that he went to the bathroom, which Cliff thinks is weird. Just then, as Cliff gets dressed, he realizes that the tag for his link is missing. With an unfazed look, David takes the tag out of his pocket, keeping quiet about what he did while he was unsupervised. In a split second, Cliff speeds off to his link and transports himself back to Earth. To his horror, he's met with the sight of his own bloodied hands. Praying that everything isn't what it seems to be, he rushes to the living room, only to discover the lifeless bodies of Lana and Henry. Cliff screams in agony, realizing that David killed his family while he was trapped outside the spacecraft. Soon after, he returns to space to confront David. However, David knows that he's basically rendered helpless, since killing him would result in their mutual destruction. He then pushes a chair for Cliff to sit in, seemingly welcoming him to the hell he's living in.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.